Have you ever wondered why some kids seem to have an unfair advantage in life? Maybe you've noticed that certain classmates always had the coolest gadgets, went on the best vacations, and somehow landed amazing opportunities that felt completely out of reach for everyone else. Well, here's the thing that might surprise you. It's not just about the money their parents had sitting in the bank. The real advantage comes from something much more valuable than cash, and it's something that gets passed down from generation to generation like a secret playbook. My name is Nick, and I've spent years studying what separates the wealthy from everyone else. If you're someone who wants to understand how money really works and maybe even break the cycle of financial struggle in your own family, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see things differently. Most people assume rich kids have it easy because daddy's credit card can solve any problem, but that's actually missing the point entirely. The children of wealthy families receive something far more powerful than unlimited shopping sprees. They get educated about money, success, and opportunity in ways that most of us never experience. These lessons start incredibly early and they compound over time, just like interest in a savings account. Think about it this way. While most families are telling their kids that money doesn't grow on trees and to be grateful for what they have, wealthy parents are having completely different conversations around the dinner table. They're explaining how businesses work, why certain investments make sense, and what it takes to build lasting wealth. These aren't formal lectures either. They're just normal family discussions that happen to contain information worth millions of dollars. The fascinating part is that most of these lessons have nothing to do with being born rich. Anyone can learn them, understand them, and teach them to their own children, but somehow they remain secrets that only get shared within certain circles. Today, we're going to break down 15 of the most important lessons that wealthy parents pass down to their kids, and I guarantee some of these will completely change how you think about money and success. The first lesson wealthy parents teach their children is how money actually works in the real world. Now, this might sound obvious, but you'd be shocked how many adults have no clue about the basics of earning, spending, and growing money. Rich families make it a priority to explain these concepts as early as possible because they understand that financial literacy is like learning a language. The younger you start, the more fluent you become. These parents don't just hand their kids an allowance and call it good. They explain where the money comes from, what determines how much someone earns, and why different jobs pay different amounts. They talk about taxes, investments, and the difference between working for money and having money work for you. Most importantly, they make these conversations normal and positive rather than stressful or secretive. Compare this to how most families handle money discussions. Either the topic gets avoided completely, or the only time money comes up is during arguments about bills and expenses. Kids learn to associate money with stress, conflict, and scarcity rather than opportunity and freedom. This creates a completely different relationship with wealth that follows them into adulthood. The second crucial lesson involves understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. This concept alone can determine whether someone builds wealth or stays broke their entire life. Wealthy parents teach their children that assets put money in your pocket, while liabilities take money out of your pocket. Sounds simple, right? But most people get this backwards their whole lives. Here's where it gets interesting. That car in your driveway isn't an asset, even though it's worth money. Say it's actually a liability because it costs you money every month through payments, insurance, gas, and maintenance. The same goes for your house if you live in it. Sure, it might appreciate in value, but it's costing you money to own it rather than generating income. Rich families focus their energy and resources on acquiring true assets. They buy rental properties that generate monthly income, invest in businesses that produce profits, or create intellectual property that pays royalties. The key insight is that wealthy people never buy luxuries with their own earned income. Instead, they figure out how to acquire assets that generate enough income to pay for those luxuries. Let's say a wealthy person wants a fancy sports car that costs $2,000 per month to lease. Rather than using their salary to make those payments, they might buy rental properties that generate enough monthly income to cover the car payment. This way, when they eventually return the car, they still own assets that continue producing income. Meanwhile, someone who paid for the same car with their paycheck has nothing to show for it except years of payments. The third lesson focuses on teaching children that they're not entitled to anything simply because of their family's wealth. This might seem counterintuitive, but wealthy parents understand that entitlement is one of the fastest ways to destroy both money and character. They know that the world doesn't owe their children anything, and success requires effort regardless of your starting point. There's actually a well-known pattern in wealthy families where the first generation builds the fortune, the second generation maintains it, and the third generation loses it all. This happens because each successive generation becomes more removed from the hunger and work ethic that created the wealth in the first place. Smart, wealthy parents recognize this danger and actively work to prevent it. They create expectations and responsibilities for their children that require effort and achievement. They might provide opportunities and resources, but they don't hand over success on a silver platter. The goal is to give kids the tools and knowledge they need while still requiring them to develop their own skills and work ethic. The fourth lesson involves teaching children how to connect with other people effectively. You might think this is just about being polite and making friends, but wealthy parents understand that relationships are the foundation of almost every opportunity in life. They invest heavily in socializing their children from a very early age because they know the compounding effects of strong social skills. When a child learns how to communicate well, make others feel comfortable, and build genuine connections, doors start opening throughout their life. Teachers treat them better, which leads to better educational outcomes. Other parents want to include them in activities and opportunities. As they grow older, they develop networks of relationships that create business opportunities, career advancement, and access to information that others never receive. This isn't about teaching kids to be fake or manipulative. It's about helping them develop genuine social intelligence and the ability to add value to other people's lives. When you can make others feel heard, understood, and appreciated, they naturally want to help you succeed. The fifth lesson shifts focus from cutting expenses to increasing income. Most families teach their children to be frugal, save money, and avoid unnecessary purchases. While these aren't bad habits, wealthy families approach money from a completely different angle. They teach their kids to focus on earning more rather than spending less. This creates a fundamentally different mindset about money and opportunity. Instead of looking for ways to cut the grocery budget by $20, wealthy people look for ways to increase their monthly income by $2,000. They understand that there's a limit to how much you can reduce expenses, but there's virtually no limit to how much you can increase your earning potential. This approach requires completely different thinking patterns. Poor families might stress about whether they can afford a $5 coffee, while wealthy families are busy figuring out how to generate an extra $500 this week. It's not that rich people don't care about money. They care about it so much that they refuse to waste mental energy on small expenses when they could be using that same brain power to create significant income increases. The sixth lesson revolves around building daily habits that create massive advantages over time. Wealthy parents understand that success isn't about making one perfect decision. It's about making slightly better decisions consistently for years and years. They teach their children how to identify beneficial habits and then stick with them long enough for the magic to happen. Most people underestimate the power of habits because the results aren't immediately visible. If you start reading for 30 minutes every day, you won't feel smarter tomorrow. If you begin exercising regularly, you won't look like a fitness model next week. But compound these small actions over months and years, and the results become absolutely transformative. Rich families use this understanding to their advantage in every area of life. They create habits around learning, networking, physical fitness, and financial management. They understand that habits are essentially automated success systems that require willpower to establish but run on autopilot once they're in place. The seventh lesson involves completely reframing how children think about money itself. While most families treat money as either evil or scarce, wealthy parents teach their kids that money is simply a tool. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not good or bad any more than a hammer is good or bad. The value comes from how you choose to use it. This might sound like a small distinction, but it creates dramatically different relationships with wealth. When you view money as a tool, you can think clearly about how to acquire it and deploy it effectively. When you view money as somehow morally charged, you create internal conflicts that sabotage your financial success. Think about how many people you know who feel guilty about wanting more money, or who believe that wealthy people must have done something wrong to accumulate their wealth. These beliefs create psychological barriers that prevent people from taking the actions necessary to build wealth. They'll unconsciously sabotage opportunities because deep down, they don't believe they deserve financial success. The eighth lesson focuses on developing long-term thinking patterns rather than seeking immediate gratification. Wealthy parents teach their children to think in decades rather than days or months. This completely changes how you evaluate opportunities and make decisions about your time and energy. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and massively underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. This leads to constant frustration and giving up on goals that were actually achievable with more realistic timelines. Rich families help their children develop patience and persistence by setting appropriate expectations about how long meaningful success actually takes. When you're thinking in 10 or 20-year time horizons, you make completely different choices about education, career development, and relationship building. You're willing to invest time and energy in activities that might not pay off for years because you understand that the biggest rewards require the longest timelines. The ninth lesson emphasizes that knowledge and skills are more valuable than money in the long run. This isn't about getting good grades or collecting degrees. It's about becoming genuinely valuable to other people by developing abilities that solve real problems in the world. Wealthy parents teach their children to constantly ask themselves how they can become more useful to others. The marketplace rewards people who create value, and the more value you can create, the more wealth you can command in return. This creates a sustainable foundation for financial success that doesn't depend on inheritance or luck. The most successful people aren't necessarily the smartest or most educated. They're the ones who figured out how to solve problems that other people are willing to pay to have solved. Sometimes this requires advanced technical knowledge, but often it's about understanding human nature, communication, or systems thinking. The 10th lesson shifts focus from trading time for money to making money work independently. This represents the fundamental difference between being rich and staying middle class. Most people learn to exchange their hours for dollars and then spend those dollars on things they want. Wealthy people learn to use money to generate more money without requiring additional time investment. This concept can be difficult to grasp initially because it seems like you need large amounts of money to make it work. But wealthy parents teach their children that it's about developing the mindset and skills rather than having a specific dollar amount. You can start practicing these principles with small amounts while you're building toward larger investments. The key insight is that every dollar you don't spend on immediate consumption is a dollar that could potentially be generating income for you indefinitely. This changes how you evaluate purchases and opportunities. Instead of asking whether you can afford something, you start asking whether buying it is the best use of that money compared to investing it for future returns. The 11th lesson involves understanding that solving bigger problems leads to bigger rewards. Wealthy parents teach their children to look for challenges that affect large numbers of people or create significant value for others. The size of the problem you solve directly correlates to the amount of money you can earn from solving it. Most people get trapped in jobs where they're paid to do repetitive tasks that someone else has already figured out. While this provides steady income, it limits your earning potential because you're essentially renting out your time rather than creating something valuable. Rich families teach their kids to focus on identifying problems and creating solutions rather than just following instructions. This doesn't necessarily mean starting a business, although that's one option. It could mean developing expertise in areas where you can provide unique value, building systems that help organizations run more efficiently, or creating products that make people's lives better. Like, the key is focusing on value creation rather than time trading. The 12th lesson warns against wasting time on activities that don't translate into real world value. Wealthy parents are much more selective about how their children spend their time because they understand that time is the only resource you can never get back. This creates some controversial perspectives about traditional education. While learning is obviously important, many wealthy families question whether spending 4 years and accumulating massive debt for a degree that doesn't lead to better opportunities makes financial sense. They'd rather see their children developing practical skills and real-world experience. This doesn't mean abandoning education entirely. It means being strategic about which types of learning provide the best return on investment. Sometimes this involves traditional schooling, but often it means apprenticeships, entrepreneurship, or focused skill development in high-value areas. The 13th lesson revolves around understanding the difference between good debt and bad debt. Now, this might sound like an oxymoron to most people, because we've all been taught that debt is something to avoid at all costs. Your parents probably told you to pay cash for everything and never borrow money unless it's absolutely necessary. Well, wealthy parents teach their children something completely different, and it's one of the reasons the rich keep getting richer while everyone else stays stuck. Bad debt is money you borrow to buy things that lose value or don't generate income. Think about financing a new car, putting vacation expenses on credit cards, or taking out loans for the latest gadgets. These purchases make you poor because you're paying interest on things that either depreciate or provide no financial return. It's like paying extra money to dig yourself into a deeper hole. Good debt, on the other hand, is money you borrow to acquire assets that generate more money than they cost. Real estate investors do this all the time. They'll borrow money to buy rental properties because the monthly rent covers the mortgage payment and hopefully provides additional cash flow. The beautiful part is that tenants are essentially paying off the loan while the investor builds equity in an appreciating asset. Here's where this gets really interesting. Banks and other lenders actually love to provide good debt because it's less risky for them. When you borrow money to buy something that generates income, you have multiple ways to pay back the loan. If you borrow money to buy a sports car, your only option is to use your salary to make the payments. But if you borrow money to buy an apartment building, you can use the rental income, sell the property, or use your salary as backup options. The 14th lesson focuses on the 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle. This mathematical concept states that roughly 80% of outcomes come from 20% of actions. In business, this might mean that 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. In your personal life, it might mean that 20% of your activities produce 80% of your results. Wealthy parents teach their children to identify and focus on the 20% of activities that create the most value. This is actually why many rich kids aren't necessarily the top students in their class. Getting straight A's often requires massive amounts of time investment for relatively small improvements in actual knowledge or opportunities. That extra time might be better spent gaining real-world experience, building relationships, or developing practical skills. This doesn't mean wealthy families don't value education. It means they're strategic about where they invest their time and energy. They'd rather see their children get solid grades while also starting businesses, learning from mentors, or developing expertise in areas that translate directly into financial opportunities. The 15th and final lesson might surprise you the most. Wealthy parents teach their children that Having money doesn't make you a better person. It just solves certain types of problems while creating others. This lesson is crucial because it prevents kids from developing either superiority complexes or guilt about their family's financial success. Money can solve problems related to basic needs, security, and access to opportunities. It can't solve problems related to relationships, purpose, or personal fulfillment. Some of the most miserable people in the world are incredibly wealthy, while some of the happiest people have very modest financial resources. Understanding this distinction helps children develop a healthy relationship with wealth. Rich parents also emphasize humility and respect for others regardless of their financial situation. They understand that money can disappear quickly if you make poor decisions or encounter unexpected circumstances. More importantly, they recognize that treating others poorly based on financial status is not only morally wrong, but also strategically stupid. You never know who might become important in your life or career. The reality is that most wealthy people are actually quite humble and down to earth. The obnoxious, entitled rich kids you see in movies are usually either fictional or they're trust fund babies whose families failed to teach them these important lessons. People who built their own wealth understand the value of hard work, relationships, and treating others with respect. So there you have it, 15 lessons that separate the wealthy from everyone else. The beautiful irony is that none of these require a trust fund to implement. They just require a willingness to think differently about money, time, and opportunity. Whether you're broke or well off right now doesn't matter nearly as much as whether you're willing to start teaching these principles to yourself and the people you care about. Because at the end of the day, the best inheritance you can leave isn't money. It's the knowledge of how to create it. Now stop making excuses and start making changes.